Welcome to the Shudder. I've got 3 Bigfoot encounter stories from the Deep South. All of them are white Bigfoot sightings. Now, we don't get to hear many about white Bigfoot, and I've got 3 in this video that I think you're going to enjoy. Okay, grab that beanbag chair that you had to duct tape the seam on to keep the beans from spilling out, and settle in. I just read a Louisiana encounter and thought it great that someone else had seen a white Bigfoot. I have not told anyone outside of friends about my experience, although there were plenty of others around at the time. This encounter happened in Columbus, Mississippi. Myself and several of the neighborhood kids were out playing in my front yard. I was the oldest, so the rest of the dozen or so kids were 4th grade and earlier in school. All of us were playing tag, and to make things level out for the younger kids, we all were turning around and around to get dizzy so the youngers could have a fighting chance of catching us. All of a sudden, my youngest brother ran through the group yelling, "Booger! Booger!" He looked scared to death. I considered that he might be joking, but then my other brother did the same thing while pointing toward the unoccupied side of our duplex apartment house. Soon, I looked around to find that I was the only one left in the front yard. The rest of the kids had run to where the parents were, outside chatting next door. All of them were holding on to their parents. I looked down the street, but saw nothing unusual. I looked again, both ways, same result. But as I was turning back toward them, my eye caught a movement beside our duplex. Something was standing at the corner, hugging it as though to peek around a corner. It appeared to be slightly hunched over, and yet the top of its head was at the top of the window. The top of that window was at about the 7-foot-plus level, could have been higher. One day I might get a chance to measure it, because the house is still there today, although the neighborhood is not where I would care to be at any time nowadays. Anyway, I stood there looking, trying to figure out what this white hairy thing was. Earlier in the year, maybe a couple of months, there was a report of a white gorilla that had escaped from a circus. Thing is, kids knew when a circus was around in those days, and I hadn't heard of one being anywhere near. Anyway, it was just standing there, slightly moving kind of side to side. Since it was at dusk, and I couldn't really tell what this was that I was looking at, I slowly backed over to the grown-ups area. Eventually, the thing was hidden from my view by the house. I eventually worked up enough courage to make a wide arc toward where I saw it to see if it was still there, but no, it was gone. I had a terrible time sleeping that night. I didn't want to be anywhere near a window, even though we had no AC and it was warm weather. The next morning, I went to the area just to see if I could find anything, but saw nothing. After that, I was never late for supper again, and never stayed out after dark. The experience is real, though I have questioned my brothers about it, and they don't remember it at all. If it was the grown-ups playing a joke, they never came clean, and it was over 7 feet tall. That's not an easy thing to fake. I was raised in the small town of Dry Prong, Louisiana. We spent many nights in the woods camping, most of the time in the swamps around the little river. One night, we were sitting in camp, listening to the sounds of the night and watching the lightning bugs as they floated in the still air. All of a sudden, the woods came alive with screaming, not like anything I'd ever heard in my life. I know what panthers and wild boars sound like, but this was one sound I will never forget. We shined the flashlights out into the direction of the screaming, and what we saw, or thought we saw, was to say the least, somewhat upsetting. I only got a quick look as it was moving extremely fast through the brush. My first thought was polar bear, because of the size, and it was white as snow. As ridiculous as that sounds for South Louisiana, but it looked more like a giant man running on all fours with its head up. My grandfather and uncle were raised in this part of the woods, and I had never seen them afraid of anything. But this was one time that was different. We would have left right then and there, but it had rained earlier in the evening, and the road was too muddy to travel. We had to spend the night, and what a night it was. I can't remember ever being so scared in my life. That thing tore the woods up all around us, and it screamed and made some of the weirdest noises I've ever heard. I don't think I will ever forget that night. Even as I write this, 20 years later, I can still hear it. In the early morning hours, it finally went deeper into the swamp and out of our area. We waited until first light, and with gun in hand, we decided to have a look at whatever was there. The small trees were broken about 6 feet off the ground. Not totally off, just snapped and shoved down. The grass around them was flattened to the ground, and we looked for some kind of footprints. What we found, no one would have ever believed. They were huge. They were human-shaped and at least 20 inches long. I have to tell you one thing. I had never heard of a Bigfoot or any other kind of cryptid animal at the time. But now I know what was there, and it was one night I will never forget. A few years ago, my wife Liz and I purchased a cabin on Toledo Bend in South Louisiana. It was small, but perfect for the two of us. We were in our early 50s, and our 2 kids were on their own. We only lived there for about 3 weeks, and if I had noticed the signs sooner, I would have figured out what we were dealing with and maybe avoided making the mistakes you'll soon hear about. We'd hear these strange howls at all hours of the night. They kind of sounded like wolves, but they were quite powerful and had different pitches at times. Sometimes they would start out high and end low, and others they would just drone on for several minutes. One night, we heard the loudest screech coming from just down the valley. It was a little too close for comfort, and I made the mistake of taking my .30-06 rifle out and firing it in the air. It's an extremely loud rifle. The hope was the sound would scare off the animal that was making that scream. What it actually did was set off a chain of events that ended with us moving. It was around 9:30 p.m., about an hour after I had fired the rifle. The droning and screaming did stop at the time, but when we were getting ready for bed, we heard something large hit the roof. I wasn't sure, but it sounded like a large limb had fallen from one of the pines in the back. Then it happened again. I grabbed my rifle and light and walked out to take a look, but couldn't see anything. Strange that we didn't hear anything roll off the roof. I went back and got myself ready for bed. Liz was there waiting, and I told her that I saw nothing on the roof, so we got into bed. About 12:30 a.m., I was abruptly awakened by Liz shaking the devil out of me. "David, wake up!" I, of course, woke in a state of panic, because she never acted that way unless something was wrong. So I piped up and could immediately hear what had her concerned. "Do you hear that?" she asked. "Oh yes, I can hear it." It was a deep guttural growl, and it sounded like it was right by the window. We had a light out front, but on the side by our window, it's black as pitch. This growl was not letting up. I mean, not even a break in it. I took my rifle and told Liz to pull the curtain and I'd shine the light to see what was making the growl. We were thinking cougar, but when she pulled the curtain, nothing was there, at least not close. The growl was still there, but not where we thought. It's coming from the trees about 40 feet away. It got faster for a few seconds of us shining the trees, and then it stopped. Suddenly, the screams we had heard in the distance were right upon us. I mean, it was deafening. Liz was shaking. She grabbed her phone to call the sheriff. Once she told him what was happening, he told us to stay in the house, and he would be out in the morning with a game officer to have a look around. If anything tried to get in, to call him back. Well, nothing tried to get in, and we got little to no sleep that night. The screams finally gave way around 4 a.m., but still, neither of us slept more than a few hours. The sheriff showed up at around 10:30 that morning with a game officer. They took a look around, but couldn't find anything. I asked about the howling and growling, and he confirmed it was more than likely a cougar in heat, and the howls in the distance were more than likely a pack of wolves. I had remembered the roof and told them that we had heard things hitting the roof very hard early on. We all walked around the house to take a look, and there they were, 2 large rocks sitting in the gable. They had to be at least 8 to 10 pounds each. The officer didn't say much, but he acted like he knew something. The sheriff suggested it must be people and to get more lights around the house. They both left, and we went in, discussing the possibility of a human person throwing a 10-pound rock up on the roof. We both felt it was something else. That evening, we were eating dinner. The sun was behind the trees, but not quite behind the horizon when we heard the scream. Again, it sounded like it was right up on us. I grabbed my rifle and headed out the door to see if I could find the culprit and put an end to this harassment. I walked down the west side of the house toward the back where the scream was coming from, my rifle at the ready. Suddenly, the noise stopped, and so did I. I was standing there as still as I could be, listening and scanning the edge of the tree line that was about 30 feet away. What I saw would solidify an increasingly bad feeling that we were dealing with something different. Indeed, this was the case. Standing just about 40 feet from me was a Sasquatch. Now, I had heard of Sasquatch and had vaguely submitted to the possibility when I put the large rocks on the roof together with the screams in the night, and when I saw it, I almost felt relieved just to be confirmed, but it was fleeting. I was frozen in place. Oddly, it didn't appear the way most Sasquatch are reported. It was light gray and white in places. Like a gray wolf, its color was very light, almost white all over except the shoulders, forearms, and upper thighs was a light gray. I can't say it was male or female, though I got the sense it was a male. It was quite imposing as it stood very still just staring at me. The only movement I saw was its hand at the end of a very long arm, clenched into a fist, then relaxing again. It did this several times. Its eyes were deep and black as coal. There was little to no hair on its face, just a white trim of short hair framing its pale beige pink-colored face. It was massive and at least 6.5 to 7 feet tall. I was starting to get the feeling there could be more. I didn't want to look away, but because of this feeling, I turned my head to the right to quickly scan the tree line for another. When I turned my gaze back to the creature, he was gone with barely a sound, though I could hear it moving into the thicket just behind it. I stood there for a good minute, contemplating what I had witnessed and wondering how I was going to tell Liz. I really didn't want to tell her, but I knew I had to. When I got back to the porch, she was standing there, and she could tell I was flustered and quickly ushered her back into the house. I told her what I had seen, and the look on her face said everything. We were not going to be staying there any longer, but the trauma wasn't over yet. That night, we sat down and made the decision to sell the place. As we sat at the dinner table, we heard several of the long howls in the distance, which made the decision much easier in the moment. Nothing else occurred that night. The next day, we went into town to get boxes and rent a truck to pack up and move back to our house in Alabama that hadn't sold yet. We got back to the cabin around 3 p.m. and began packing right away. We didn't want to spend another night in that place. We didn't have much to pack and finished boxing up just about dark. Liz wanted to take a shower and rest before we loaded the last few boxes in the truck. As she was showering, I sat in the kitchen reading. I heard the water shut off, so I put my book down, and as I did, I heard Liz let out a loud scream and then my name several times in quick succession. "David! David! David!" I ran into the bedroom, and she grabbed me and held me so tight I could barely breathe. I held her away from me so I could see her face and asked what was wrong. The window in the bathroom was textured and opaque, but you could still see through it somewhat. She said I was just stepping out of the shower when I happened to turn and look toward the sink. I could see something was at the window, but couldn't make it out. I thought it was leaves or something, and then I saw it, that face with its nose pressed against the glass looking at me. I was so startled I couldn't catch my breath. When I finally did is when I screamed for you. As I was backing away and calling your name, the face disappeared. I was angry. I tried to let go to grab the rifle and go after it, but she wouldn't let me. She got dressed in a hurry, and we went to the truck and sped out of there. I came back the next day with a hired hand to get the rest of what we left. Liz wasn't going back, and I wasn't going to ask her. Since then, we found a new place, and haven't had any more experiences like that, but we are aware and take precautions when we go near any woods. We're quite happy staying at our new home in the city, but we'll never forget our time with the Sasquatch around the reservoir of Toledo Bend. Wow, what a great account. I hope you enjoyed those deep south white Bigfoot encounters. If you did, please consider hitting that like button, and if you subscribe, make sure you hit that notification bell so you can join me here next time for the Shudder.